Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Ray. This is the RayWenderlich.com podcast. Welcome to episode 1 for season 12. This episode was recorded on Thursday, the 4th of November, 2021, for release on the 17th of November. This episode is sponsored by the book Modern Concurrency in Swift. I am your host, Dru Freeman, with my Tell It to the Dough co-host, Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Dru. This episode, we dive into the book Modern Concurrency in Swift and talk with author Marin Todorov and Final Pass editor Shai Mishali.
Hey, it's great to have you guys on the show. The book has been out, admittedly, from the time we were recording this, mere hours. So Susannah and I have taken our quick dives on the book, and we're looking forward to discussing it. Okay, so let's take a moment to credit the rest of the team on the book. We've got Marin as the author, and you as the Final Pass editor. Well, who else worked on the book?
Yeah, except for the two of us, we have two technical editors. We have Rich Turton and Felipe Lasso-Marzetti. We have Sandra Grauschopf, who's the language editor, and of course, Manda Frederick, who's the book team lead, who's worked with us on a bunch of books so far. That's the whole dream team.
And this is an enviable task. We've been waiting for this and hoping for it, but Apple basically dropped it on us less than 6 months ago, and you've turned around and gotten this book out.
That's all Marin's magic. He can talk about it, but it's been crazy watching it from a side. But I'll let you talk about how crazy it was to make this book.
Yeah, let's be honest. The Modern Concurrency was pitched, I don't remember, 4 years ago now. Mm-hmm. So we had a pretty clear plan where things are going to go. And the implementation has been slowly trickling down into the nightly builds of Swift. And so I had nightly downloads from the Swift.org toolchain that had the Modern Concurrency experimental feature. Everything was behind an experimental flag. So I've been playing with this for a while before WWDC, and I knew that it's super exciting, and it's taking shape and so forth. So I wasn't 100% sure it was gonna go out on WW, but then when it did, I think it was pretty clear we have to go as fast as we can, and make sure that people have something to read as soon as possible.
Yeah, I also think that many of us, we all really hoped for a while, because the entire Swift community was kind of talking about how this is the next step in figuring out the concurrency stuff on Swift for both server and client work. And I think that many of us expected it to just come in Swift 6, so it was a really pleasant surprise to have it in 5.5. Really exciting for sure.
So this does go back to the manifesto. Were you following Latner's manifesto when it first came out?
I must say that I did read through thoroughly when it came out, and it all made sense. But I think at the time, it described such a big departure of what we had, available, that it sounded, like maybe it's something that will come in Swift 10 or Swift 20 or, something like that. And so I did have it in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know that it's going to be a tangible feature that lands in an official release so soon. So this is definitely exciting. And we did have I think about 15 different pitches under the concurrency umbrella. And those, you could feel that during last year that those became more, thick and not so fluent anymore, and I know they went through the motions, and it looked like a lot of people are really happy with them. So you could see how things are shaping up. This was really, I think, the evolution process is something that makes the Swift language itself just it's thriving. At the moment, it's just very solid, predictable process that gives confidence to the developers and to also companies to use it.
Yeah. Also, just wanted to add to that I guess I've had the luck and pleasure to work in a lot of huge projects. And I think that you could always find yourself dropping into these crazy corners of like huge threading issues and race conditions. And I think that it's one of the big unsolved issues that have been in Swift and iOS development for a while now. And I think it's super exciting that we finally have like really great tools and diagnostics to help work around this problem in a way. Still a bit of gotchas to work around, I guess, and know about, but it's still very exciting progress for the Swift language.
Can we jump up to a really high level and do some, I've read the introduction to the book. I understand the book is pitched at an intermediate level developer, okay? But let's say somebody is not quite there, that they're more of a beginner, but they want to understand, they want to know what they should know about concurrency. What would you tell that person? What should you be learning about concurrency as a new developer?
Well, Cocoa apps and iOS apps in general are inherently asynchronous, right? So there's many parts of your application that are happening at the same time, right? You can scroll things on screen at the same time, play audio at the same time, be in a network call of some sort that is fetching data from the network and so forth and so forth. So all these parts are kind of happening at the same time. And so they don't really stop and wait for each other, right? Like you don't stop the audio any time that you start scrolling if you do things right. And so it's important to understand that there can be many different things, many small tasks that are working on the same thing or just in coordination and so forth. And so concurrency is something to understand and keep in mind and know most importantly, the constraints of it. And so when few things are working on the same thing, they might conflict into what a variable should be, or who owns a piece of data and so forth. So these are the kind of problems that are arising from things happening concurrently.
Where are you likely to first use it? Where are you likely to first run into the need for async await when you're working on beginning stuff?
I think maybe just give a very naive example here that every beginner developer would know, which is basically think that if you're in an app that has just a button and you tap that button and it fires some network request, it shouldn't prevent you from still using the app itself. You are able to concurrently both run the process of drawing the UI, for example, and performing the network request, which is a bit different from parallelism, for example, which is like also concurrency, but it's the idea of having a lot of parallel pieces of work working together. So really this is just a simplification of what Marin just said. It's about being able to manage different pieces of work, and work means drawing UI, it means making a network request, it means anything that happened in your app on the correct threads simultaneously while still managing it in a sane way, basically.
Are we effectively seeing a way of saying goodbye to completion handlers, or will completion handlers really still have their place?
Hopefully. I'd say my personal opinion is that I hope they're gone. I don't know if it entirely solved the problem, but you do get automatic, I think, bridging from completion handlers to async await, which kind of hints you that Apple wants you to go that way, right? So you can already await things that would have a completion handler. It kind of wraps it up for you. And I think Apple already took this way to moving to more modern concurrency stuff, like from we had blocks, we had closures in Swift, then we had combine, now we have this async await stuff. It's just like an evolution of also kind of trying to have a pairing with other modern languages that already have these language features for a while, and kind of powering up in a way.
You mentioned combine, and when SwiftUI came out, they also brought out combine. And combine, it was a combine. It was a huge field tractor that pushed through this entirely new concept. But it really seems like it was a holding technology, because when Async await was introduced, combine wasn't mentioned at all. And it makes me begin to think, combine was sort of there to hold us until we had the answers now. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, I'm curious too, though, how they fit together.
I have too much to say about it, so it's better that I don't start talking about it.
So Combine is a reactive framework, right? Like it's a framework that helps you manage reactive streams, and so it's really powerful into tasks as have a stream of values coming from the network being combined with some user interaction events being combined with something else, and like this driving like your whole app from one single place, and things like this. So complex tasks can be solved really easily if you know well the combine operators and you have a little bit of experience and so forth. While the modern concurrency is one level lower, the way I see it, and so it's there to kind of obsolete your interaction directly with Grand Central Dispatch, and so it's there to basically remove the need of you to say dispatch queue main this or dispatch global queue that, and so forth and so forth. So the way that you think about queues or threads and so forth is a thing of the past. And the new concurrency is being managed completely transparently for you. You just say this function should be asynchronous, this should be asynchronous, maybe this closure should be asynchronous, so forth. And then the runtime takes care of all of these to go to the correct thread, to go to the correct place, being executed in the correct order, having more important pieces of work executed first, and so forth and so forth. So
we don't need to think about queues and threads at all anymore. We just need to know, is something asynchronous? Do we want to wait for this thing to come back or not?
Right. So async await is exactly that. And so every time you await an asynchronous function, that goes through the runtime, and every single time you use await, there's an opportunity for the runtime to check how you're doing, check how other processes are doing, do they need more resources, and so forth and so forth. So the more you use async await, the better it is for the cooperative model that drives the whole asynchronicity between your app and other apps too. And so there is an abstraction that is somewhat, I don't want to say similar, that takes care of some of the things that dispatch queues were solving in GCD. Those are the actors. But they, of course, do much more than just that. So I don't want to say that they're a similar thing in the new concurrency.
Yeah, the new concurrency has their own view of what actors are.
Yeah, so actors are types that mostly and mainly encapsulate state, and so they kind of like have an automated management system around their state. You can imagine a class that has this like super powerful receptionist. And so anytime you need access, there's a receptionist saying, yeah, you wait, you come in, please hold on, and so forth and so forth. So like it's completely managed for you, so you can never have a race condition, you can never have a crash, and so forth. But they do more than that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where I outlined that I love doing this as a podcast rather than, say, a book or a screencast, because you're feeling like, if I could just give you some code snippets right now, that would make this a lot easier to explain. And we're trying to take the 20,000-foot look and then the 10,000-foot look. And I really appreciate you coming up with analogies, because that really helps the listeners begin to get their grasp on this thing. So, well, we've covered the fact that this is an intermediate book, and that you should have at least some understanding of the ideas of concurrency. Now, one of the things that tripped me up when I was looking at it originally was that if you use await, you need to mark it as async. But if you're going to mark it async, you need to call it from something that's async. So where does that start up the queue? How does that work? Because the first thing I discovered was, well, where do I say this is where the async begins?
Right. So it is a kind of a thing to solve for yourself when you have a little bit of experience, I guess. I was just talking to John Sandell earlier this week, and we were saying exactly the same thing. He was like, "Oh yeah, I made one function async, then the one that called it needed to be async, and then the one that called it needed to be async, and so forth." So if you start unraveling, you can just get out of control, and sooner than later just have to redesign your whole app and so forth. So I wouldn't really do this. There is a type called task in the new APIs, and task is a piece of asynchronous work. You can think about it in past terms as a closure, as an asynchronous closure. And so inside task, you have a concurrent context, and you can do asynchronous calls. And other parts of your app that are not strictly inside a task are synchronous. So you don't need to await, and you cannot await anything. And so I think it's important to realize which pieces of your app are synchronous and which part of your app might be asynchronous or might be concurrent and so forth. And then separate them into synchronous, strictly synchronous, and maybe asynchronous parts. And this is not as difficult as it sounds. If you look at a SwiftUI app, you have all the view modifiers, right? Like in each view modifier is a little piece of code, hopefully a little piece of code. And so each of these usually runs synchronously. So it's easy to say, hey, these parts are synchronous, and here I can call these ones. And then other view modifiers are strictly asynchronous, like the new task modifier. And so you can neatly separate which calls you do where and so forth. And each time in your synchronous context, you need to do some asynchronous work or concurrent work. You can start a new task really just by saying task, open closure, and insert the asynchronous calls in there. And now comes the question, how to funnel data back from your asynchronous code into your synchronous code. This, I think, is the big question. I think that we're gonna see patterns emerge for sure, or maybe the APIs will get richer a little bit next year. Right now, you get kind of need to decide it for yourself. But in the book, we do a lot of this, back and forths between synchronous and asynchronous. So there's a whole variety of showcases in there.
Yes, I'm listening to you describe this. I wonder if are there new design patterns that go with this? It's just listening and wondering without having played with sample apps yet. It really makes me want to see, okay, how did you do that? Which, of course, is the great part of the book.
Yeah, I think that another thing that's really nice about having specifically async await is that it does exist in a lot of other languages for years. So there are patterns that we can kind of migrate and learn from other languages. God forbid JavaScript, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind. That is a strong player for that. Even actor model, it's something that came from Akka and other strong languages that have this model for a long time now. So there's already prior art that we can base our new patterns on for Swift and for iOS apps, even though it's not the same product eventually. The patterns, I think, would be the same moving forward. But I'm sure the community will come up with its own stuff, like it's bound to do every time a new interesting feature comes out. And it's going to be interesting seeing that happen from the side.
So one of the questions that this leads me to is, because you mentioned a lot of using the task in SwiftUI, is it lending itself more easily to SwiftUI than, say, UIKit? Or is that pretty much off the table, and it should pretty much drop into either once you understand the patterns.
From what I've seen so far, working on a couple of bigger apps, SwiftUI and Combine are such a fantastic team that, Combine takes care of most of my data binding needs. And so I've been mostly using Task and Async await in my models to handle networking or to do some computation and things like this. And so leave the rest basically to SwiftUI and Combine to pipe everything through to the UI. And I think in SwiftUI the 95% of my needs so far have been just to have the task modifier, which is being executed when the view appears on screen, just to kick off some model work, basically, to say, hey, my model, by the way, I need this and this done, and then leave it be until the results pipe through the bindings back to the UI.
Yeah, I think I want to add to that we were talking about Combine a bit earlier and how, what's the relation between Combine and Async await. So I think that really Combine came out with SwiftUI for a reason, right? It powers SwiftUI through published and some of these other capabilities. And these things are still gonna live with us. It's not legacy code or anything. Combine is still gonna power every SwiftUI app out there, basically. And so I really agree with what Marin says, that the task modifier is super powerful. By the way, I actually my instinct would be that UIKit apps would benefit so much from Async await because SwiftUI already has a pretty good model for being functional in a way, being declarative in a way, but UIKit has much more legacy stuff that you can benefit from, kind of migrating away from closures into Async await and simplifying your code to read more synchronously, even though it is asynchronous. So I think it can fit any language, definitely server stuff like Marin does in the book, which is super interesting to see. But yeah, I think that Combine is very much here to stay, and it also shows by the fact that we have async publisher, which basically lets you await Combine publishers as if they were async sequences. So they also provide this bridging so you can easily kind of go back and forth.
It sounds like part of what you're saying, though, is that if you have a UIKit code base that you may benefit from this new concurrency even more so than if you have a SwiftUI and Combine code base, because you're just gonna be cleaning things up. It's gonna be so much more straightforward to read after you've used the new concurrency.
Then it's newer to begin with, and it's got a way of doing things too. While UIKit's a bit, it kind of evolved over time with a lot of different patterns. SwiftUI has it has a few ways of doing things, but it has a very kind of directional data flow in a way, and it builds in a certain way, very kind of derived from state to build views. So I think that it is going to clean up some stuff in some scenarios. But for UIKit, there's just much more mess to clean up that you could benefit to kind of migrate to this, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I will say that, and my credit to the team on this, that the book is using some of the most modern technologies from Apple. The server that runs underneath your examples is assembled by Swift Package Manager. It assembles itself very beautifully. You're using SwiftUI, you're using all the modern technologies, and it is, as you mentioned, Apple is pretty much saying this is the future. As we've learned, when Apple says this is the future, if they sit on it for a year or more, follow along or get left behind in some ways. I've seen many technologies get deprecated or get lost, and the jobs are definitely going to be moving into SwiftUI. I definitely think the jobs are going to be moving into Async and await.
Right, but you can see that, with the modern concurrency language feature, there was something that, I don't know if it's, I think it's unprecedented that there was a big voice coming from the community saying, hey, the modern concurrency is only available in iOS 15, macOS 12. Nobody's targeting like only the latest unreleased versions of these platforms and so forth and so forth. And I think that it was amazing that people kept saying that, even though for me personally being super excited about the new concurrency, but that was like annoying that so many people were discontent with it. But I mean, in the end, truly, I think no serious product would target only the latest versions. And so it seems that Apple heard that, and in the latest Xcode at the time of this recording, there's the backporting feature of the modern concurrency, which allows people to build products for macOS 10.15 or iOS 13, which is just, I think it shows that Apple is so committed to these new features and to these new patterns that they would go out their way to, do this backport. I don't know if this was planned or it wasn't planned, but it was definitely not announced in June, and so it feels like it really was a reaction to so many voices saying they really want to use this now and not in 2 years from now.
And that's the Xcode 13.2 beta that you're mentioning, right?
Yeah, 13.2 beta right now. I guess it's going to go out of beta pretty soon. I think that would be the first version to support that. It was just really phenomenal to see from the side. Like me and Marin and the rest of the concurrency team kind of looked and waited in a way, because we knew that there are talks, and we saw a first PR around concurrency, but still wasn't fully there. And then kind of Doug Gregor put up this huge PR to support backporting, and we all kind of crossed our fingers. And then boom, 13.2 came out with a changelog entry that said that it's going to be supported in iOS 13. We were all like that. Aside from making this book much more valuable, it means it puts this like super powerful technology that has the power to make your apps safer into more apps. It makes it more accessible to app developers, like Marin said. So it's really exciting to see really how Apple invested into this. I can't imagine. I imagine people running around like a fire saying, "We have to get this done," but I don't know if that really happens. Just how I imagine it in my head, basically.
And currently, on the Swift forums, I noticed that there are at least a few issues with the backport. So I'm not so sure. Let's not commit to shipping the backport so soon, but it's definitely under work, and it looks like Apple is committed to it. So this is just great.
Yeah, let's remember that it's 13.2 beta.
So does that mean it's premature to talk about what gotchas people might experience in using the modern concurrency targeting iOS 13 because it's in beta, basically, because the backport's in beta?
Probably the gotchas right now is the fact that it's in beta. Like, that's really the gotcha, right? Because we don't know how stable or unstable it is. And like, I didn't follow the forums as well as Marin did, but if people are already complaining about it, then it means, I mean, as expected, that it was like not rushed, but it was done really quickly, like surprisingly quickly. So it makes sense. There are a few bumps, but I'm super confident they're going to fix and smooth out all this stuff, and we're all going to be able to enjoy it. Hopefully by 13.2 final and not later, but yeah, we'll see.
I'm also pretty confident there's one clear gotcha, which is, and we can talk about right now, which is that even though you target, say, iOS 13, and the modern concurrency module is going to be automatically backported for you and bundled with your app, so you can use actors, async, await, and so forth, you still cannot, of course, use APIs that are available only in iOS 15, like the extensions on URL session and things like that. So, foundation or core data frameworks that have the async await extensions or special methods and so forth that were introduced in iOS 15, you will still not get them somehow automatically if you're targeting iOS 13. So
I'm curious if they're gonna fix it, because it sounds like it should work. Like if they already went through all the trouble, then who knows?
Well, this is not really so easy though, because depending on how these APIs are implemented, it might be more difficult. Because currently, from Doug Greger's post, what I understand is, and what I kind of like see in the build binaries, is that if your project is targeting an earlier version than iOS 15, it kind of like bundles the libdispatch with your app. And so your app doesn't use the system libdispatch, it uses its own custom libdispatch. So that's why it has access to async await and task and so forth. But if these other APIs, like on Foundation and Core Data, are defined in these other modules, then you don't get them alongside with the bundled concurrency module. So it really depends how it's structured in the source and so forth. So I simply don't know how it's going to look like by the end, but currently you cannot use them in the beta version for sure.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that was added in iOS 15, because a lot of people, I think, take a very primary view of this and think that we've added async and await into the Swift language, but there was a lot added into the actual frameworks to make this much more robust. Can we talk about some of the areas that people should be looking at that have been enhanced?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm asking, are you referring to anything specific around concurrency, or?
Well, some of the frameworks that effectively were enhanced for concurrency. I'm curious if you could highlight a few that you really should say, okay, I use this kind of a framework, and here are some of the enhancements that now exist.
Yeah, I think the most obvious stuff that we kind of got with Combine as well. I think that every time they deliver something, like they meaning Apple, deliver something related to concurrency or multi-threading, they provide extensions on URL session, because it just makes sense, right? So you would be able to await a URL request. But interestingly, you can also, which is something that we do in the book, you can like await like a socket request and listen on like await the bytes coming in from a request, for example, or stuff like that. I think that's like a really strong, like a really powerful API change. If I remember correctly, there are a few other like heavy sync APIs that they added like async variations for. I recall, like correct me if I'm wrong, Marin, I just remember something about like UI image or something like that they added async variants for, but I might be wrong about this.
Yeah, I think that there's some kind of a, like automation script that has added an async version of every function ever that has a clear callback parameter. Because I was going through documentation and it looks like all of these, obvious methods that have a callback, all of them, produce a deprecation warning, or used to in one of the betas of Xcode. They don't anymore, but they do have like an async variant. So I guess there is a lot of automation going there, making sure that you can use everything as async as possible.
I think that generally they mentioned that they would bridge automatically like methods that have their last argument as a closure to async functions automatically, and I think that applies also to your own code and not just like Foundation or system frameworks, which I think is also super powerful for kind of migration and bridging portion of moving your code into this new paradigm. That's a big change. Like it also, like if you use the refactor tools and you could kind of right click and say convert this to await and stuff like that, they added a lot of interesting content around that.
That's obviously if you are targeting iOS 15.
Yeah, until the backport is final, and by then I'm hopeful that we'll get most, if not all of this stuff. As Marin said, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm hopeful that if they were able to solve such a huge issue with the feature itself, then I'm hopeful they can resolve the extensions themselves, but you can never know.
Let's step back for a moment from concurrency, and one of the things that I like to cover on this show is that we have programmers who are people as well. So we like to take a moment and just talk to you guys about what you're doing, what other things you're involved in, and specifically things that go on when you're not attached to a computer, which I realize for both of you maybe never. But we hope, I know, Marin, your dedication was to your daughter. How old is she now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Dru, are you saying that some programmers are also people?
We tried. We really try to get that idea across on this show because.
Yeah, so my daughter is 4 now. I think 4.5 or so. Yeah. 4.5.
And Shai, you also have a young child at home, right?
Yeah, Ethan, he's 2 years, 3 months old now. Very cute, very crazy kid. Yeah, he was born when Combine went out. Actually, I remember I flew out to New York to talk in a conference. He was like 6 weeks old. And I used this photo throughout the entire slides. Wow. It was really funny. And then every time people say, like, how do you remember his age? I say, or like, how do you remember how old Combines? I just say it's the age of my son. Like, it's easy. So, yeah.
No, my son is iPhone aged.
Oh, so that would be 15 or 16 years old.
He's 15 years old. He came out with the iPhone. So, yeah, it's interesting because for him, that means that touch technology has always been a thing.
That's fascinating.
I have one thing to ask, like who was the engineer or the designer who decided that a locked phone can still make photos? Like every week I have to clean like about 2,000 photos for my iPhone because my daughter will just find it and I just like press on and that's it. I would agree with like a single shot photos on a lock screen. I can get this so people can make like a photo. But like, what's the point of the phone being locked if you can just press on and like do 200 shots in one go?
This is us crying about the fact we love our kids so much, but they are messing with our phones all the time, basically.
Okay, but it is really funny years later when you go back and you look at the photos, because my kids are older, and you see that like, oh, look at all these. This must have been from when they took my phone and they were like little, and it's funny.
No, I just looked at the settings and you can't turn it off. I mean, you can't turn it off in the settings.
Nope, you can't. I mean, you will try, but no, you can't.
But then again, I learned that I had to lock my phone back when my son picked it up and started dialing Spain. So, the nice thing was that the way he had dialed it, and the iPhone basically said that this is a Spanish phone number. And I'm like, well, that's not a good thing. Let's stop him from doing that. But that was also back in the days where if you had 10, what was it? If you had 10 missed logins, it would erase your phone.
Whoa. Those are scary days. So I had a follow-up beyond how great your kids are. I mean, which should be a central theme in all conversations, always. But so you guys, I know that for Marin, this is your 10th book, which is mind-blowing to me, and Shai, your 7th. Yeah. How do you manage your work and this amazing productivity here at Ray Wenderlich and parenting? What are some of your life hacks to manage to get stuff done and maintain some shreds of sanity?
I want to preface what Marin is going to say with the fact that this guy wrote 2 chapters a week for a few months. It was crazy. So now tell us how you did that.
Right, without sounding too smug, I want to clarify that this is my 10th book for Ray, but before that I did work on other tech books. But yeah, so I think that is... I was discussing, but I cannot really remember who with. I think it was with Ray on a call a few months back, and we were just discussing. He was saying, like if everyone was as efficient author as you, this would have been like much easier, and and so forth and so forth. But like I said, yeah, but you have to, if you're comparing, it's just not fair, because you have to think about like how efficient I was when we were working on our first book together on iOS 5 by tutorials. And so this was like a blip show, like everybody just trying their best, but like it doesn't really work on the first try so well. And then the second try was, I think, a little better, but it was also pretty much winging it and so forth. And so the amount of times that I've been through the process, I think it just helps out immensely. There's no a lot of red tape, and there's no a lot of new things to pay attention to. Kind of like I've worked through this like already so many times that kind of like I really can just be totally zen and think about my own stuff. And like I know how much should I be doing as an author, and like what kind of like input like everyone after me expects, all the editors that are working on this team. And there's a lot of people to take care of, like whatever you write, right? So I think just being familiar with the process and like doing only the thing that is expected from you and leaving the other people on the team to do their work, I think this makes most of the difference. Shai?
Shai, how about for you as a Final Paths editor and somebody who's worked on a whole bunch of books?
Yeah,
where do you find the time? Where do you find the space? Literally, like what does it look like for you in your home day to day?
That's a good question. First of all, I did both. Like I did books as author. I think 3 so far, and 3 as Final Pass, or first Final Pass, and 1 as technical editor. So the first book I did was with Marin as well. Was the Realm book. I was like a TE on that, technical editor. I think that time-wise, evenings, basically. Like I try to clear as soon as baby's asleep, a couple of hours every day, depending on like what phase of the book we are on. If it's like crunch time or a bit more laid back. Like in this book, it was a lot of crunch time just because we wanted to get it out the door quickly. I think that for me, there are a lot of parallels for how I started developing iOS apps to how I started like going into books. Like I kind of started with tutorials, and I was like, wow, people are actually reading this stuff and they're really enjoying it. They're getting value from it. Then I got the opportunity to start doing books, and people bought the books and they enjoyed them. And then I wrote my first book, and then I was like, wow, people are really like liking it. And it was like that first time when you compile an iOS app and someone touches that button and they enjoy the code you wrote. And I think that, the fact that I can write stuff that is helping people, or I can edit content that other people wrote and make it, smooth for other readers to follow, that helps them develop their next app. That's something that's really like exciting to me. And I agree with Marin that like once you don't have to think about the ceremony so much. You know how the flow works. You know the kickoff and all that process. Then it doesn't scare you as much. It's not intimidating. You're used to it. And the 7th book is easier in that sense than the first book. Also, like when you're a Final Pass editor, you're expected to basically know the entire process very well. So I'm pretty much used to it by now, as Marin is. I think that's pretty much it. Just decide to dedicate the time to it. Try to find the time in the evenings here and there, and that's it.
I really want to say that I appreciate you guys coming on the show. It's been a great dive into Async and Await and Concurrency and the new book, which I know will be very popular because it's just this amazing technology we've all been waiting for. I want to thank you both for your time and talking about so much today. It's been a pleasure having you. Marin, we can find you on Twitter at iCanZlib. Is that correct?
Right, that's right. But like the easiest way to find me is underplot.com. This is my personal page. And they have like
Underplot.
Yeah, I like the word.
And Shai, you are Freak4PC.
Yeah. Who of us has the most ridiculous Twitter handle? Me, I think. By the way, is it Zlib like the compression? I always wanted to ask you, where does the nickname come from?
It's unlike the compression. Zilp.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, it's pretty much like, like when I created my account exactly 14 years ago, it's like I had no idea that Twitter is going to be something that like is going to stick around. At the time, like people were just posting their breakfast and things like this. Like it was, hey, I had an egg. All right. So I just came up with some gibberish, and then the whole Ray Wenderlich team thing happened, and yeah, now I'm stuck with it
Forever.
Yeah.
Susannah you can find online at Suzgupta, that's SUZGUPTA. I'm Podcast Dru, that's Podcast DRU. In 2 weeks, we're going to come back with one of our old co-hosts. Jen Bailey is going to be on. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode. That's going to wrap things up for the episode. For my guests, Marin Todorov and Shai Mishali, and for co-host Susannah Skyer Gupta, I'm Dru Freeman. But for now, it's time to send things back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.